Great. Thanks everyone for coming this afternoon. I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of the exhibition and talk through the selection of objects that we've chosen for this show before you have a chance to go and have a look at it. I'm going to start really by just introducing the sort of concept of the show. So it's called Silver, Light and Shade, and really the idea behind that is to show the versatility of silver and also to show sort of why it has such enduring importance as a material. And in particular, looking at techniques, looking at how people have actually used the material to create sort of a selection of extraordinary objects, but also how decoration, texture, and the surface of silver can be transformed in so many different ways. So it's really trying to show the nuances of silver, the nuances of the kinds of objects that we've shown. And so the sort of first section of the exhibition is really trying to kind of introduce the concept behind the show. And so there are three pairs of objects, one set of which you can see on screen here. And actually the object on the left, one of which we've borrowed from All Souls College in Oxford. It's normally on loan to the Ashmolean Museum, but they've kindly let us have one of them, which is really exciting. This is actually the earliest piece in the show. Dates from 1400, and it's a flask. It's a sort of sometimes known as a pilgrim flask, but it's essentially for water or wine, which would be served. It would be served, for serving those liquids, but also it's a display piece. It's for both. You could use it, but like a lot of the objects here, they're also extremely grand, high status objects that are very much about displaying wealth, displaying status, and also displaying great design. And here you can see it's shown alongside another vase, which is much more recent. This is from 2007, and it's by Hiroshi Suzuki, who's a Japanese artist who's for a long time worked in the UK. And he's kind of transformed the surface of the silver by creating this sort of frosted texture. And essentially, these two sets of objects are made using the same techniques, raising a flat sheet of silver with a hammer or a series of hammers to create vessels like this. And I hope you can see from this and the other examples that I'm going to show you in a minute the sorts of contrasts that this show is all about. It's meant to be trying to show this sort of amazing contrast, the amazing versatility of this material. The next set of objects that you'll see when you enter the exhibition, so the first thing you'll see, these are two beakers, again, quite different time periods. The one on the left is the Castle beaker from the V&A, invented to this exhibition, and it's actually the earliest known piece of domestic English silver in existence. So it's a really sort of amazing, rare, unusual object. But for me, one of the things I really love about it is its amazing simplicity and modernity. The sort of ribs that it has, the sort of buttresses around the base of it, are just, it could have been made sort of a much later date than the date it was made, which is the end of the 1500s. So it's a really extraordinary object. And alongside it, you've got an example of modern silversmithing. This beaker, water beaker, is by Rod Kelly, who's very much known for his engraved decorations and his flat chasing in particular. And this piece actually shows the tools of the silversmith. So it's really celebrating the material, celebrating how you can work with it and transform it. The third juxtaposition in the introductory section of the exhibition are these two pairs of dishes. Again, very grand sorts of objects that you'd find on a sort of impressive buffet. Again, across time periods. On the left, you have a really amazing ewer and dish, which is called the Mostyn ewer and dish, which is it actually belonged to a family called the Mostyns in North Wales in Flint, and was in their family until the 1970s before it went to the National Museum of Wales, which is where it lives usually, except now it's here. And one of the things that I find extremely exciting about this object is that it sort of exemplifies a lot of the things that this exhibition is trying to show. It's about the surface of silver in terms of having been in the same family for a long time, it's actually not been transformed that much from its original sort of surface. So you can see that the border and the centre there, and then details of the viewer are gilded. But it's actually deliberately contrasting with the white of the normal silver surface. So that's how a lot of historic silver was treated. And if you can imagine looking at William Holbein's early English silver, some really important pieces, the actual all-over gilding was not that typical when they were first made. So if you can imagine them looking something more like this, that's kind of much closer to how perhaps they were when they were originally made, and how, we don't actually know, but possibly how Holbein first saw them, but in line with the taste of his time, he gilded things, he changed things, and that was quite typical for collectors to do that. One of the other things that I think is really exciting about this dish is actually what you can just make out in the middle, and you'll have to be able to see much better in the position, but here, it's actually got the original coat of arms, again, because it was in the same family for many centuries. It's got the original enamel in the centre, which normally doesn't survive, because, again, as we know from Holbein's collection, he put his own coat of arms on things, therefore replacing the ones that were originally at the centre of the object. So here you've got the original one, but it's actually done in enamels, which again is so unusual for that to survive, because normally they've been engraved and it's just a very different look. So, and that contrasts with James Short's piece here, which is called the Millennium Dish. This was made, as you might be able to guess, in 2000, and it's a celebration of essentially the mysteries of the universe. It's sort of quite an all-encompassing theme here. If you can imagine, it's the stars, the sun, the sky, and at the centre, the sort of black hole of creation. It's quite a sort of quite a vibrant piece. But again, using really fantastic enamelling skills that James Short has to essentially echo how dishes, display dishes of that height would have had enamel at their centre. And again, a really nice example of showing how modern silversmithing kind of echoes the styles and tastes and motifs that you find in historic silver. And I think that's something that certainly continues through the exhibition. So the exhibition you'll see when you go to the space is quite a different way of looking at the Roper Gallery. It's quite open, it's quite bright, and there's no sort of specific order that you have to see things in. Each case has an introductory text, but there are three themes within the exhibition, three sections. So you've got the introductory section, which I've just talked you through, and then you've got three sections which are demarcated by a different colour, which is sort of translated on the cases. So I think this hopefully will make a lot more sense when you go upstairs and see how we've decorated the space. But essentially you can follow the themes of the exhibition through three sections. So you've got texture, and then form, and then colour. And so I'm going to talk through each of those sections, but basically to give you the sort of overview, the texture section really focuses on technique. And it's looking at the amazing ways that silversmiths can transform the surface of silver by using different techniques, and actually to show how there's so much continuity between the techniques that and the tools that silversmiths used hundreds of years ago, and they still use the same ones today. And the form section is really focusing on design, and it's looking at how an object can be created from a design, what the thinking process is, and how different silversmiths approach that very differently. And also why some objects are considered important for many years and conserved and kept and looked after. The final section is much more about chemistry and experimentation and trying out new things and really working to transform the surface of silver into something totally unexpected. So to return to the first section, which is about texture. Here are some of the objects that you'll find in the first case, and of course you will recognise, I hope, the tea bowl and saucer at the bottom left there, as we have two of those in the collection. We have a pair. And the other one is on display in the Fletcher Gallery in the tea, coffee and hot chocolate case. If you've noticed that, you'll notice that contrary to what it might appear, this actually isn't a sort of Art Deco tea bowl and saucer from the 1920s, it dates from 1700. And for me, this was a really important starting point for this show, because I wanted to highlight things in the Holborn's collection, but also to show that there really is a striking modernity to some early silver. And actually, although all the pieces in this case are from a range of different periods, actually the three at the top are modern, and the three at the bottom are old. So this dates from 1700, this dates from the 18th century, and this dates from the late 17th century. It's an example of the auricular style, this kind of style of decoration that has no starting point and finishing point. It's really about fluidity and how decoration can flow from one point to another. And in contrast to that, you've got Miriam Hamid's piece at the top, which is inspired by the currents of water as it sort of ripples under the surface. Using slightly different techniques. In the centre there, you've got Kevin Gray, who has made this extraordinary beaker using quite kind of contemporary modern technology. At the top left, you've got Envidia Cuvia's wine cooler, which is you know, an extraordinary sort of, it's got its sort of sense of movement, and especially as light moves over it and sort of almost flickers over the section, especially as you move around it, you'll hopefully see again why sort of the title Light and Shade, why we chose that, and why silver can kind of, I don't know, defy your expectations, hopefully. And also I think it's worth saying that there is a continuity between how these pieces are actually made in practice. So Envidia Cuvia's huge piece, which you'll see it's massive, is hammered from one sheet of flat silver. And, you know, again, this tea bowl is made in the same way, so it's really extraordinary to see that continuity in scale and also in style and technique. So there are lots of different ways that you can make objects from silver. You can, as I said, hammer it from a flat sheet. You can melt it and put it into molds to cast it. And these are two examples of that process. Actually, both on loan from the Ashmolean. You've been very generous for this show, which is very nice. But one is an 18th century Rococo sauce boat, and the other is a 17th century tankard, which is made by a German maker called Jacob Bodendijk, who came and was working in London. And you'll notice actually a lot of the names of the people making the silver that's in our show, it counts as English silver because it was made mostly in London, although there are a few exceptions to that, I should say. But the people that made it are often from all over Europe. They came to London and really transformed the styles and tastes of the things that were being made, especially sort of Huguenot people from fleeing Catholic France and Protestants from all over Northern Europe. Bodendijk's one of those, who was a German. And here you've got lots of different parts that have been cast and then sort of chased, which kind of accentuates the decoration and kind of enhances the sort of the variation on the surface. The way that this is actually made is, if you can imagine a sort of a sheet of metal, which is, and this one is actually gilded, and then over the top of that is this whole kind of elaborate cast decoration. And you'll definitely recognise this style of decoration with the putti and the acanthus leaves. You'll recognise that in a lot of silver from the Baroque period, from the 17th century. And you'll definitely be able to spot those motifs again and sort of follow that through the exhibition. But and also in our collection as well, that's certainly, they're motifs that you see again and again with a little curving and floral decoration as well. But again, the contrasts in this piece between the sort of gold of the background and then the overlay is quite striking, but again show how frequently silver and gold were combined. And it's very rare in 17th century pieces that everything was always gilded. There was always a variation in tone and in texture and in colour. The piece on the left is, as I said, it's sort of a Rococo sauce boat with this extraordinary dragon creature on the top, which I'm quite a fan of. trying to work out what he means, because so often the decoration on silver is about some family connection. It's to do with, you know, something that the person who commissioned it wanted to express, but you can't always find out exactly what that is. So, you know, any suggestions on a postcard? But the thing that's really unusual about this is that normally you'd expect a source boat which to be made by, again, hammering a flat sheet of silver, and then you'd cast the decorative details and then sort of solder them on. But in this case, the whole of the source section actually had the cast decoration already on, so the mould sort of had the patterns on rather than being applied. It's quite an unusual way of making a piece at this date. Again, it shows, you know, in a sense, it's about function, but it's about so much more than that. The decoration was integral to the piece in so many ways. One of the other threads that I think you'll certainly be able to follow through this exhibition is the timelessness of some shapes. And actually, for me, there's something really important to say about the fact that not all historic silver is really decorated, and it's not all completely over the top and gilded and sort of covered in putti and acanthus leaves. In fact, these pieces are all date from before 1700, which to me is quite striking. I mean, I know that old black and white photographs, which does kind of add to that aura of, you know, cobwebbiness, but they are, you know, when you see these objects in person, there's a simplicity that I can only define as modern. It's really crisp. It sort of looks 20th century almost. But actually, these are kind of high status objects. This bowl, if you look out for on the front of it, I think it's around the other side in this picture, but there's actually a coat of arms on it. So this was actually owned by a courtier, James II. So, you know, it's an expensive, high status, pricey object, even though it's not that highly decorated. Equally, this tea caddy has got sort of textured decoration on the different panels, and you know, requires an extraordinary amount of precision to actually get all the bits to be the right shape. It looks simple, but actually to get the geometry right, working with sort of heated metal and hammers and soldering, it's actually very challenging. But also, I think has, yeah, again, this striking modernity. And the little beaker at the top, I find this one of the most sort of strangely alluring objects in the show, because again, it combines gilding with plain silver. It creates texture in lots of different ways, but actually is quite a simple thing. But again, the sort of the ball decoration, it looks quite strikingly modern again. And when you see it in person, you know, it's, to be able to you know, imagine holding something, it's really designed for human scale, which a lot of the things in the exhibition, they are grand and showy, they're about status. But, you know, these are just as much about status, even though they're on a much more sort of human scale, and you might actually use them. And the other thing to say about these is really that the tone of the metal changes if you use it. So it's really interesting to see that something that's hundreds of years old really does have a different patina. Even if you've polished it, it just looks different because you've used it, because it's got this layer on layer of kind of scratches and kind of almost like not quite dents, because you can hammer those out, but you know, there's a sense that it has a different quality to something that's brand new. But equally, you can do very exciting things with stuff that is modern. And this piece is by Teresa McGuyan. It's a centerpiece, and it's really about experimenting with texture and the ways that you can transform the surface of silver. It's got an amazing sort of, you know, it shows that you can create these amazingly organic forms in something, because silver is a very malleable metal. It's very soft, so you can actually create these amazing textures. And again, by contrasting very shiny bits with much more matte areas, you get a sort of a real, that's how it catches the light. It's by the variation, the light and shade that the artist has used in creating that surface. On the other side, we've got a piece by Gerald Benny, who is well known for his enameling and jewellery, sort of very high-end jewellery. And this is actually a cigarette case, the sort of objects that we don't really see that much anymore because so many people don't smoke. But very much of its kind of time in the 1970s. But again, a sort of high-status object and very much a kind of office plaything, you know, very, very high-end piece. But actually, it's also very practical because the textured surface that Benny invented, which was called bark surface, it's looking back at historic techniques, but creating a very practical surface where, in fact, you can open and close it, but you don't see the finger marks. They're sort of disguised by the texture of the piece itself. So you've already seen the beaker on the right, which is Rod Kelly. The other one on the left there is by Michael Lloyd, and it's these two chaps are basically the sort of best regarded flat chasers working today. They're very much known, and what I mean by flat chasing is the decoration that you get on the pieces by essentially using a very fine sort of chisel and then hammering it into the surface to create decoration and patterns. That requires a huge amount of skill. And I think it's worth saying that, you know, we're quite familiar with the concept when you're talking about paintings of, you know, the hand of the artist, the brushstroke, and I think that applies equally to this kind of work. And if you can imagine the sort of the skill, the precision that's required to do that, and actually when you compare these two makers' work, you can really see the difference. The depth of the chasing is, you know, just as much the hand of the artist as brushstrokes are. And there's actually, there are a couple of short films in the exhibition as well. And one of them is actually of Rod Kelly, who made this piece demonstrating the process of chasing. So it's definitely worth a watch. With that flagon, because you can't really see the decoration very well here, but in person, comparing the sort of loose floral decoration here, which is several centuries before this piece was made, there's a real continuity again in style, and I think they're just a really nice pairing. This is a 19th century fan dish. It's very much inspired by Japanese decoration. So it comes from the time after the sort of opening up of Japan, where suddenly people were exposed to Japanese design, and it was hugely influential. This is made by Elkington, and it's on loan from the Goldsmith Company, and I think a really nice example of how contrasting sort of flat areas with very kind of detailed engraved decoration alongside class areas gives you the opportunity to sort of showcase lots of different textures, tones and colours all in one surface, all in one piece. And actually it's a bit of a testament to the fact that in sort of Victorian Britain, people were being extremely experimental with materials at this point. So essentially silver for many centuries, since 1200s, has been regulated by various statutes. So if you're a silversmith, you have to register your mark, you have to sort of go through various stages of training, and you also have to have your pieces assayed, which means they take a sample from the metal to establish whether it's pure enough. So when you're talking about sterling standard or Britannia standard or pure or fine silver, or like what you see sort of 925, that refers to the percentage of silver in the alloy. So 925 on a bit of silver, that is a recognised amount of silver alloy. So it means that 92.5% of it is silver and the rest is usually copper. And copper is alloyed with silver for strength. So essentially silver on its own is too malleable to be useful. So it's alloyed with copper to make it stronger. And the regulation that we have in the UK and we've had for many, many centuries is different from how others have regulated silver. So in other countries, there weren't these restrictions about purity, about quality of silver. So they could actually mix lots of different metals and create variations in colour and texture and tone by actually being much more experimental. Whereas in this country, actually the only way you could do that was by decorating it differently, better, more innovatively, more imaginatively. This is another sort of virtuoso example of engraving, and the reason I've given it its own slide is because this is massive. You'll see it in the gallery. And I think the reason that it's in the show is that it really exemplifies one of the other features of silver. So we've talked a little bit about status and about how you're essentially showing your wealth in quite a visual way to anyone that comes to your home when you're having silver on a buffet, when you're kind of displaying it. But actually, and again, that's certainly not to be described here because you've got a strong great coat of arms in the middle. That's very much about the owner and his wealth. But you've also got this massive expanse of plain, undecorated silver. And what that's doing is not only showing that you can afford a great, huge piece of silver, but it actually reflects the light and reflects anything that you put in front of it, reflects candlelight. If you imagine, the days before electricity, the impact that having huge amounts of silver gilt or silver on your buffet would have is quite remarkable. And this is a really great example of that. Another great example of that is the way that lighting and candles were actually, silver was used often for candlesticks, so that not only would it look grand and be expensive, but you'd actually get the added bonus of reflecting off the silver itself. So here, this is a sconce, which is basically a candle holder that goes on a wall. And the back plate that you can see here is, again, essentially for reflecting light. They were often also put actually in between windows, and so with the unintended disadvantage of often setting fire to curtains. But they were, again, very high status objects about showing wealth, but also showing good design. And we've got, you'll notice this picture is a little bit more informal than some of our others. This is because it's taken, you can just about make out the trimming on a chair there. It's actually on a chair in this house, which is the home of it's Boughton House, the home of the Duke of Buccleuch in Queensbury, and we borrowed it from their collection. We've actually borrowed two sconces. One is the original 17th century one, and one is a replica, because we wanted to show basically that the tone of silver is very different depending on when it was made, or can be, and actually the contrast is quite surprising. But I will say, the real one's on the left. The proportions of this slide, I think, when I put it together, seemed less off, because you can see the underside quite a lot bigger than the objects. But this, I think, will be the first time you're seeing our newest acquisition to the Decorative Arts collection, which is, we were recently given a fantastic toilet service, so used for the toilettes, by the Roper family in memory of Brian Roper, who many of you will know was a trustee here for a very long time, and he died a few years ago. And so his family have given this toilet service to the museum in his memory. So in this exhibition, we're showing two objects from that service. The whole thing will go on display next year. I think we posted on that. But again, you'll recognise the little, the pretty and acanthus leaf decorations, which sort of tell you it's late 17th century, 1690s, this piece. And these are flasks for scented water. And the reason there's a massive picture of the underside of this, and actually in the exhibition you'll see that one is shown standing up and the other is shown so that you can see the bottom, is because it's a reminder of what the back or the underside of an object can tell you about its history. Because that's one of the challenges with silver, is that you can do things to it that you can't always detect, so you can't always tell when something was gilded, you can't always tell who's added what decoration at what point. You have to rely on kind of style and other information that you can get from an object. And also, the underside of an object can tell you a lot about its sort of personal history. So here you've got this massive coat of arms, and that's the coat of arms for Jane Bickerton, who was the mistress and then wife of the 6th Duke of Norfolk. And she was a bit of a controversial one, because she made that unusual transition from mistress to wife. She was the second wife. And there are letters which refer to her in kind of slightly unfavourable terms from his friends. But oh well, she had this nice service, so I think she probably won in the end. It's all right. Also, you've got two other things on here that I just want to point out. So this is actually, it's the letters J.I. stamped on, and that's for Thomas Jenkins, who was the maker of these flasks. They're the only piece in the set that's actually marked with his name, so, but they are a matching set, so it's quite an interesting idea of like how sets are put together. The other thing that I'm going to point out are these numbers here. So these are called a scratch weight. When you see that on the bottom of silver, that's actually the literal weight of an object in pounds and ounces. So it tells you, although I have to say there's a whole other weighing system for silver, but you know, it's it's kind of a bit much to kind of go into that because it's quite complicated. But it basically tells you and reminds you that the weight of silver is an expression of its actual worth in currency. And it's another reason why people had silver. It's not just about being showy, it's not just about increasing light levels, it's not just about having good taste. It's actually because it's quite a good way to store currency. And, you know, we talked a bit, you know, with our normal collection, you know, that we've got pre-English Civil War silver, which is quite rare because so much is melted down for its worth to actually fund the wars. So that's what those are about. And it's why in silver catalogues you always get the weights, because it actually is quite an important way of recording and it helps you to work out whether an object's genuine as well, because if the weight listed on the object is significantly more than you've got, something's been removed, and if it's significantly less, then you know what's been added, and you have to sort of try and unpick that and work that out. So this is actually not the toilet service that the flasks are from. It's a different one, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what the service looks like. I should say that ours doesn't have a mirror, so don't be too disappointed when that doesn't appear. It would have at one point, but it doesn't exist anymore. But this toilet service, and the reason I'm showing you this is it belonged to Sir Watkins Williams Wynne, who was a collector who commissioned huge amounts of silver in the 18th century, and this is his service, which is in the exhibition. But what is in the exhibition is some of this dinner service that he commissioned from Robert Adding. And please excuse the slightly dodgy pictures here, that's just me at the National Museum of Wales, showing a couple of examples from that service. But you'll notice these different shaped dishes here. We've got these ones, and I'll show you why. We've got these ones in the exhibition. Here's the front and here's the back of these objects. We've got two of them. There are 6 of them in the service, but we've got 2. And one is shown so that you can see the front, and one so that you can see the back. And again, it's encouraging you to look at what the marks show you and what the scratch weights show you, because again, they're here on here. But the particular reason I want to show these like this is that these are an extremely refined sort of neoclassical shape. They're absolutely sort of perfection, you know, really, really sort of refined thing. And then you look at the back and you're just reminded of the amazing skill that it takes to create something as refined as that out of metal. Because you can see the individual hammer marks, and you'll see this in person when you see them in the exhibition, but the individual hammer marks where they've actually formed these sort of ribs. And then there are these perfect rows up here of hammer marks, just reminding you that someone actually whacked this repeatedly with a hammer to create that form. And I think it's just a sort of testament to the sort of hidden skill that you don't always notice is there. Every time you see an object in silver, that's not just sort of shoved in a mould. It's not possible to do that. So it's really a testament to the skill of all the people, and some of whom we can't name at all, but that made these things. And just say, the edges of this are cut, so this is a combination of all sorts of different skills and probably different people involved in the process of making an object like this. So the tureen on the left is from, you know, a service of a sort of similar ilk to the Watkins Williams Wynne one. That's enough. And the one on the right is silver gilt, as you can see, quite a showy piece. And this one, you might be able to guess, it's from the Royal Collection. It's It's by Paul Storr, who is very well known for his very exuberant and kind of amazing combination of different kinds of style and decoration, very sculptural work. And I think the reason I've shown these two together is the contrast, really, because this is a sort of very obviously showy piece. It's a huge suturing. And it was made by the Royal Goldsmiths, Rundle, Bridge and Rundle, who worked with Paul Storr for many years, and were supplying the most sort of wealthy sort of people buying silver in the 19th century. The one on the left is an 18th century one. It's actually one of 6 in this particular service. And it's really just a reminder that although this looks like, and it is an extremely high status object, so is this. This one makes this one look small, but actually that's a huge amount of silver. That's a hugely high status object. And also it's very beautifully designed with use in mind, because there were 6, as I said, there were 6 of these on the table. And if you can imagine, that's just suturings. Imagine how massive that table must have been to accommodate 6 of those tureens. The servers would basically remove the lids. They'd set the table, kind of measure everything with their tape measures and put it all in place. And then they'd remove the lids and then take the whole liner out, go and fill it with soup, and then bring it back and pop it straight in. And then when you take off the lid, the liner's got these quite nice little hooks. Again, they decorated like shells to sort of fit in with the other decoration. But, there's attention to detail at sort of every turn with these objects. This is, I think, it's definitely the biggest object in the show. It's, again, huge. It's the Shield of Achilles. And again, it's from the Royal Collection. Again, it's made by Rundle, Bridge and Rundle. This time it's designed by John Flaxman, the sculptor, who took the decoration from Homer's poem, the Iliad. And you can actually trace that story around the shield. It was first shown at George IV's coronation in the 1820s, and this is the first time that it's been shown in the way that we've shown it. We're showing it flat so that you can actually follow the story around it. You can look at the decoration and really remember that although many people would see these things from a distance, the exceptional detail and the variety in decoration is really worth looking at, essentially. And you can really trace the individual scenes from the poem on the shield, which is really nice. I think the candlesticks that you can see here actually look slightly different in the exhibition because it has 2 parts. It was actually amended, and is a really nice example of how technology is often reflected in the form of objects. So this is a very kind of exuberant Rococo candlestick. And what you'll see is that it's had branches added. The branches were actually made by Candler, who made our cup and cover that's also in the exhibition, which I'll come to in a sec. And that kind of allowed you to have sort of even more light. So new technologies are always reflected in the forms that are being made. And we've got a couple of other candlesticks that I hope to sort of continue the story. One of the other stories, which I think might be my favourite kind of group in the exhibition, stems from this object, which is a fish slice. So from about 1750. We don't know who made it, but what we do know is that it belonged to a collector called Seymour Rabinovich, who was very interested in historic silver, but he was also a really passionate supporter of contemporary silver. And so what he did was he commissioned 100 different silversmiths working in Britain and North America to make him a slice. And what he said was, you can have this weight, use this weight in silver, and just do whatever you want, but you have to make me a slice. And he said he wanted them to prioritize the aesthetic over the functional, but still make a slice. So, and I think it's just really exciting how differently people can interpret the same commission. And it's a really nice example of that. All the slices that he commissioned are in the V&A, and we've got a selection of 6 in this exhibition. I've just picked out two, my two favourites really. The one on the right is by Simone ten Hompel, and as you can see, it's an extremely sort of minimalist, refined object, made from silver, obviously. And one of the things I particularly love about this is that the sort of very small decoration, like this slit on the this cut on the blade, and then this where the blade is actually inserted into the handle, has become a sort of decoration that's actually expressing the form of the object itself. And the slash here on this forged blade actually adds strength, so it's both completely functional and you know, quite beautiful. The other one is by Malcolm Appleby, and this is actually very much more referencing the historic form of slices. This is a cake slice. You can tell that it says "let them eat cake" around there. And then if you look at the decoration, you'll be able to notice a very buxom Marie Antoinette shoving cake in her face. In what Appleby calls refined vulgarity, which I quite like as a term. But also you can see the ice cream cone necklace that she's got on and various other things, so it's worth looking closely at that. So the final bit of the sort of the form design sort of section of the show highlights some of the sort of minimal and yet also timeless, I think, designs from the 20th century. Starting with an unexpected thing from our own collection. These two candlesticks are from the Holbeins collection. And they've not been on show, as far as I'm aware, ever. They are by Liberty & Co. And they are a really unusual example of Art Deco silver. In fact, the only Art Deco silver in the collection. They came from a collection called the Hanley Reid collection. This couple from the 50s to about the 70s were collecting an amazing amount of Victorian and Edwardian decorative art. And they had this really important exhibition at the Royal Academy in the early 1970s. And then tragically both died in very soon after that exhibition, or just before the exhibition opened, I think. And then there was this big challenge of what to do with their phenomenal and huge collection. And so it was actually split up between lots of different museums in the UK. And so you think, why does the Holborn have some of this kind of late Victorian, early Edwardian decorative arts, or 20th century decorative arts? And it's really because it's one of the legacies of the Craft Study Centre. So if you imagine it was still here, the Craft Study Centre, it ties in so much better. But now we've got this extraordinary group of 30 quite unusual objects in the decorative arts collection. And I'm sort of trying to put more on show, so you'll see another one next year as well. But these are one example of that, which I think are really striking. On the right, you've got a beaker by Louis Osman, and here are some of the other examples of that kind of refined 20th century design that I was talking about. So at the top, those are designs by David Mellor. We've got the Pride teapot in the show, and on the bottom, you've got Robert Welch's sauce boat, which again I just think are kind of beautiful, timeless decorations. And a lot of their work, Welch and Mellor's work, was made in silver, but also made in stainless steel. They were designs that could be translated to modern technologies as well. But it was made in both, and the one on the left is also an extremely functional object, because you can stack them in any order. You've got the sort of milk jug, sugar bowl, hot water jug, tea pot, going from top to bottom, but you could stack them in any order. And also, they're designed so that the ones that have lids, the lid flips over completely flush with the piece, so that when you wash it up and dry it, you can put it on the draining board and it won't tip over because it's completely flat. So they're sort of designed with thought about how they might be used, and even though they're sort of quite, again, high status objects, they're very much made with use in mind, which is really nice. It's a bit like this, with those sort of swirling Rococo Bacchanalian figures at the top. You'll recognise those from a lot of our posters as well if you haven't spotted them on the cup itself. But one of the things that is quite nice about doing a show and trying to use some of the things from our collection which is something we always try to do here, is that it makes you look again at things in our collection. And although I'd love to be able to present you with some definitive answers on this, one of the things that we've been thinking about recently is what this kind of decoration actually means, because so often on silver, the person that commissioned an object is reflected in the decoration that appears on the object. And here, you've got this kind of orange on the top, and then sort of sea creatures around here. You've got like a lizard and like a rat and some other animals that are just quite unusual. And it's a sort of question about what, why is this all of this different decoration together on this cup? And one of the things we're looking at is this bit of the coat of arms. Because here you'll recognise that Holborn coat of arms that appears on loads of the silver. So scraped off the old coat of arms of the original owner and put his own there. That was pretty standard for owners of silver. But what's unusual here is that the top bit doesn't really look like a shell. It actually looks more like plumes, like on the Prince of Wales's cup. And there are very few coats of arms with plumes on. So the question is, can we work out what the connection with the oranges is? Can we work out whose coat of arms this was? And I'd love to be able to tell you we could, but I'll keep you posted. Another piece that you'll recognise from our collection here is bell salt. It's been deconstructed recently, but it's been put back together for this exhibition, and it's being shown alongside two other bell salts. So this form is a very kind of common form for, salt and spices. I say common, I mean, there are like not that many in existence, but you get what I mean. But at the time it was a familiar shape. Lots of different silversmiths made the same shape. And this one is from the Ashmolean, which again shows the sort of subtle differences between a piece that's gilded, in this case, in sections and just on the banding, and much more kind of low, much less strong gilding than what you can see on Holborn's, which is sort of all over quite sort of strong 19th century gilding. It's quite hard often to tell whether or not something, or when something specifically was gilded, because you just can't tell for sure. But the general giveaways are that in the 19th century you get a very consistent all-over colour, because they were using modern technology of electrolysis, where they basically put the object into a bath of containing kind of gold solution, and then they applied electricity to it so that the object then attracts it, and you get this kind of all-over sheen of gold. And whereas on earlier silver, the gilding is done by mercury gilding, which basically means you paint on a kind of a solution of mercury and gold powder, and just you apply it in a different way. So you often get a very different look. And of course, probably lots of dead craft people. But we don't know about those. But whereas in the 19th century and before the 20th century, or before the 19th century, it's always gilding that you get. In the Victorian period, a bit like that tray that I mentioned earlier, the fan tray, there's a lot of experimental processes and techniques, and actually the colour combination became less gold plus silver, but actually gold plus silver plus white plus black. They were really experimenting with different colours. And this vase on the left from the V&A Jasmine vase is a really nice example of that. It's silver starting to not quite look like silver anymore. And that's really part of the final section of the exhibition. Again, I mentioned earlier that silver is allied with copper. And here you've got a very unusual piece, which is from Paul Storr, from the Royal Collection, and it's called the Galvanic Goblet. And it's actually made using zinc as an alloy instead of copper, which is extremely unusual. But again, you can't tell because it's gilded. So there are sort of lots going on under the skin that you don't necessarily know. And then into the 20th century, you've got different ways of exploring colour and sheen and texture and surfaces. So you've got here Rinko Mori's pine cone, which uses essentially different hammers and acid and other techniques to create contrasts. You've got this very matte white colour in the silver. But here you've got a pair of bowls by Vladimir Bone, where This and this are both made of really high quality silver, but it's disguised under this extraordinary surface. So one almost looks like an ebonized bowl or something. It looks like it could be made of wood, but it's made of silver underneath, but it's covered with this black enamel. And here you get an extremely similar colour, but this is silver and this is actually enamel pretending to be silver or looking silver-ish. But again, it's sort of about pushing the boundaries and experimenting and seeing what you can do. Here in the middle, you've got Richard Fox, who is best known for his trophies for Formula One, using modern technologies to create different surfaces. Again, a very sort of shiny surfaces and really sort of refined finishes. And then finally, you get silver not looking like anything like silver, as in these examples. The pieces on the left are by Alistair McCullum, who has sort of worked with a technique called makumegane, which is a Japanese metalworking technique, where you basically build up layers of copper and silver and then kind of mill it to make these very fine sheets and then break through to reveal this amazing patterning. And you can imagine the sort of levels of control to get such regular patterns on these objects. They're really sort of beautifully refined. And then the most recent pieces in the exhibition are these two, which are by Hazel Thorne. And she's using another technique again, which has only recently become possible because you can now combine silver with base metals, which you never could before, as long as you mark it saying you've done that. So the kind of statutes that regulate what silversmiths can do are still evolving and still changing today. Hazel Thorne's method is essentially, again, creating layers using silver and gilding metal and then applying different chemicals and ammonia solutions to get these extraordinary colours from the silver. These are a sort of almost a jump back in time, but they're by quite a seminal artist in 20th century silversmithing called Michael Rowe. And for me, they're really important to include in the show because, firstly, although I should say that this one here is actually not made from silver, but it's it's part of a sort of group with these pieces. And so Michael Rowe is important because first of all, he wrote the seminal book on how to use chemicals in silversmithing. If you can imagine, if you're a maker and you're trying to experiment, you can't just sort of throw chemicals on. You have to rely on training. You have to sort of learn new processes. And he's written the book on how to treat metals. But also, he creates these extraordinary forms. And I think are a really important reminder that although we might look at some historic silver and think, I'd never use that, sometimes that stuff had a function. And sometimes it was just for display, and sometimes its function was displayed. And actually, it's the same with these. These are kind of unashamedly sculptural objects made from silver. They're precious items, but they don't have a function, and that's fine. That may not be the point of them. The sort of aesthetics of silver, again, celebrated in these objects, which also I quite like because they're a really collaborative effort. They are 3 different silversmiths working together. So you've got one chap whose name I keep forgetting, Peter Musgrove, yes. Peter Musgrove raised them, so from a flat sheet, hammered them. Then you've got Malcolm Appleby, who we saw earlier with the Marie Antoinette slice. He hammered the insides and shaped them with rusty hammers to create this extraordinary texture that you'll see in this piece. And then on the outside, you've got Jane Short, who we saw earlier with the Millennium dish, doing the enamelling. And so these are about celebrating the Earth's crust and tectonic plates. But I think are just a bit of an explosion, and I think a nice way to sort of almost finish this. The last one I'm going to show you is Addy Top, and this piece is made by a technique called spinning, an extremely precise technique for making these round vessels. But the thing I was absolutely drawn to with this object is the colour, because this is made from pure silver again, it's Britannia silver, and it's got this patinated surface, which is made by essentially pouring acid on it. But the precision that's required to create these tonal variations, you can only do it once. It's not like you just throw it on and hope for the best. It's extremely skilled to get this variety of colours from it. And I think, again, it speaks to the idea that you can completely transform the surface of an object by, experimenting. The goal of this show is not to sort of give a kind of technical history of silver at all. It's a very visual show, and it's very much about celebrating material and trying to accentuate the different contrasts, but also take very seriously the idea that people want to learn about the different techniques without sort of overwhelming people with new language. So you might have noticed already, but inside the book cover there's a glossary, and that also appears in the large print label books as well. So if people want to find out more about techniques, that's where you should point them. But again, it's not sort of meant to be comprehensive, it's just a sort of introductory guide to the terminology of the silver. And also, it's worth noting that in the back of the book, there is a small section with some further reading and also further watching. So that although there are 2 short films in the exhibition, there are a couple more films here, including one about Jane Short's enamelling, which is definitely worth looking at. Just finally, we worked with the University of Bath on our learning sort of aspects of this show, because you'll have noticed that there's a lot about experimentation in chemistry, and that's partly that basically enabled us to work with the University of Bath's chemistry department. So we had, some of you might have even been here, but we had a pop-up sort of testing day a few months ago where students from chemistry courses at the University of Bath designed the activities for our SATFA Centre and then tried them out with the children to see whether they actually work. And then we've essentially refined that into the activities that you'll now find in the SATFA. So it's really worth a look at those. We've got 3 different activities. One, there's a big stained glass window on the window, which people can sort of add their own decoration to. And that's looking at the fact that, although we don't really know it, the first nanotechnologists were stained glass makers, because they mixed silver particles with the paints to actually create tonal variations in stained glass windows and create different colours. There's also activities related to the fact that silver has antimicrobial properties. So it appears, actually you may not know again, but it appears in clothes and in socks to make them not smell and things like that. And so you can take some of the motifs from the silver in the exhibition to decorate your own clothes and then hang them on our washing line. And then there's an homage to Holborn's way of displaying his spoons. You can, again, decorate and design and decorate your own spoon, not from actual silver, but from silver card. Can't win them all. And add them to our spoon medallions. And also, at the bottom there, you've probably noticed the additions to the shop, which Josh and co will talk a bit more about anyway, because it's a bit of a departure for us having the work of lots of different contemporary makers on sale here. But we've got 30 different silversmiths who are selling work here, and there are the sort of catalogues out there as well that you can find out more. But I think, Josh, is it right to say in briefings you'll talk a bit more about that? Yeah. But, you know, encourage people to get their Christmas presents there, etc. Yeah, it's just a really nice opportunity to have things by contemporary makers, and that's very much an idea of this show, is to try and encourage people to engage with this material, to be excited by silver, and actually to realise that it has enduring relevance today. So I will leave it there. I'm sorry, I hope I haven't gone on for too long, but thanks all for listening.